Rob here at etrailer.com, and today we're going to be taking a look at the Roadmaster Diode 7-wire to 6-wire Flexo Wiring Kit. Now whenever we're flat towing our CRV, obviously we need to get those signals to the back. So whether we're changing lanes or slowing down and stopping, or if we're driving at night, we need to have those signals back here so everybody can see us and we can safely and legally get down the road. But you can see I have the lights on my motorhome and the turn signal going, and we're actually being sent all the way back to our CRV. And our diodes are going to allow us to use our factory taillights and use the signals so they come through rather than having to use those magnetic lights. I know we've all seen them where there's just magnetic lights that you stick on top of the roof or somewhere on the body, and you run that wire up to the front to hook up to the back of the motorhome. Now they do work, but that's one extra step that we have to take whenever we tow, not to mention when we get where we're going, we have to take them off so we can drive our CRV. And we're going to have that wire going all the way down the front or the top, moving around in the wind, potentially scratching the paint. But with our diodes, it's going to be a one-time installation, so once they're in, we can pretty much forget about them. We drive around like normal, but when we hook up to our motorhome, we'll have all those signals sent back here. Our diodes are not only going to allow those signals to come in, but they're also going to protect our CRV's electrical system. If there was a problem on the motorhome end, it's going to prevent any kind of backfeeding, so we don't have to worry about our CRV's electrical system because the diodes are going to protect them. Now our diode kit is going to come with an umbilical cord. Now this is going to be needed because we have to hook up our motorhome to our CRV to get those signals. Now on the motorhome side, it'll provide us with this 7-way RV style connector, so you just plug it directly into the back of our motorhome. Then on the car side, we're going to get a 6-way connector, as well as the plug that comes with it so we can mount it on the front and get all those signals to our CRV. Now the umbilical cord that comes with our kit is going to be coiled like you see here, which is nice because it's going to retract down whenever we have a lot of slack, so it'll keep it off the ground once we have everything else hooked up. But at the same time, if we do need a little bit of room, our cord will actually stretch out to be about 8 feet, but when it's retracted, it's only going to be about 15 inches. So we have the cord when we need it, but it'll retract down and keep it off the ground when we don't. Now one thing I do want to mention is that on our umbilical, it's wired so that the center pin is your 12-volt power source. There is 2 different industry standards, so whenever you're wiring your plug up on the front of the vehicle, you want to make sure you make that center pin the 12-volt power source if you have a charge line or anything else on the front. So keep in mind that's only going to be one component of a safe, complete flat tow setup. There's going to be 5 major components that every car is going to need. The first one is going to be the base plate. That's what's going to be the connection point so that we can hook up to our motorhome and use our tow bar. Now, the next one is going to be your tow bar, and that's what's going to hook to the base plate and to your motorhome so you can safely pull your car down the road. After that, we're going to need safety cables, which are going to be our secondary line of defense in case our tow bar fails and there's an accidental disconnection. Next, we're going to need wiring. Now, there's going to be several different kinds of wiring, but I always suggest diodes if your car can use it, because that way we don't have anything extra to set up, and it's going to use the car's taillights to get the signals. Then finally, we're going to have our braking system. Now, a braking system is going to be required in almost every state, and for good reason. We're putting a lot of weight behind our motorhome, and we're asking it a lot when we slow down, because not only does it need to slow itself down, but now we added a couple thousand pounds behind it. So a braking system is going to allow our CRV to slow itself down, so we're not putting so much strain and stress on our motorhome. Now specifically for our CRV, I do recommend the Roadmaster Fuse Fuse Bypass, because if you look in your owner's manual, you are going to be required to pull a fuse, and it's just a lot easier to hit a switch rather than having to pull the fuse, crawl under the dash, put it in the cup holder, remember to put it back. It's just a lot easier, flip a switch, and you can be on your way. One last component that I do recommend is going to be the Roadmaster Brake Light Relay. Now what that's going to do is that's going to prevent our CRV from overriding the turn signals that were coming from our motorhome. If we're going down the road, we're going down the highway, want to change lanes, but at the same time we may need to slow down a little bit. If we hit our brakes in our motorhome and have a supplemental braking system on our CRV, that brake signal is going to cut our blinker out and it'll go solid in the back, which means it's going to be really unsafe driving around. But that brake light relay will allow us to not have that happen, but when we're driving normally, our brake lights will work just fine. Now when it comes to the installation, it is going to be pretty straightforward. We're going to get everything we need to get them installed, and really the whole process of installing it is going to be mounting the plug on the front, running your wires all the way to the back, and then tapping into the wires behind your taillights. Now a lot of customers may be a little bit nervous about that because they don't want to cut into their factory wires, but it is definitely something you can do, and we can even show you which wires to test and how to test them so you can make sure you're comfortable doing it. In fact, let's walk through the installation together. To begin our installation, we want to pull our 4-pole wire out of the kit, and we want to route ours from the front all the way to the back. Now you'll notice that we are missing the fascia on our CRV, and that's because we just got done putting the base plate in, which is going to be the best time to do your wiring and any other installs, since it's making it a lot easier to route it from where you're going to be mounting your plug all the way to the back. We're not going to have to fight the grill, try to reach behind there, but when you are routing it, you want to stay away from any major heat sources that may damage your wire. And I'm going to be routing ours from the 2 posts, because that's where we're going to mount ours, again, all the way as far back towards the taillights as we can. Once I have it routed, I'll show you how and the path that I took. So what I did is I made sure that I left myself enough wire up here at the front that I can still access the wires and mount the plug up. Zip tied it to my base plate. I ran it along towards the passenger side. I actually ran it up, went right behind my headlight here, came into the engine bay, ran it towards the back, towards the very back of the firewall, and then I actually dropped it down right here so I could avoid the axle and everything else up front. Then underneath, my wire came down right by my front control arm. Now if you look up further, you do want to double check where it's coming down. You want to make sure it's not on top of the sway bar or on top of your steering components or anything else. Then I started routing it towards the back, zip tying it in place. I actually went underneath this panel, started following along, and once I got to about this section, I actually loosened up this panel just by removing the push pin fasteners and the bolts on this edge of it, so I could pull it down far enough to get my wire inside, because it's actually underneath this panel here. I just ran it all the way down until I got by my fuel tank. Continued to go up, again securing it to some factory wires and lines, and went over the rear axle and the subframe brace. And then once I got to this panel, I went ahead and left the back on, but I took all the fasteners out here so I could drape my wire over the top of it. That way once we go underneath this panel, we can just drop our wire through and we have access to the end of it, as well as a decent amount underneath that panel. Now what we need to do is we need to separate all 4 of our wires as far up as we can get it. So if we can separate them all the way to the last anchor point, or where they're right underneath this panel, that's what we want. So you can either just grab the end of the wire, grab one of them, and then just start pulling them apart until we have all 4 separate wires. If you can't grab it with your finger, you can take a pair of cutters, cut right in between the wires. You just want to be careful not to damage them. So we're going to go ahead and start pulling these apart until we have 4 separate wires. Now once you have all 4 wires separated, we're going to move up top, and we can remove our taillights so we can start doing some testing. Now if we open up our rear hatch and we come right to the edge, or just the inside of where our taillights are, on the lower section of our taillight, we're going to have 2 fasteners holding it in place. So we'll grab an 8mm socket and pull those 2 bolts out. And once we have both of those bolts removed, you want to grab your taillight kind of low, because this upper section is not going to come out with it. It's actually a separate piece, and you want to try to grab it and pull as straight back as you can, because there's some alignment pins over here on the side and we don't want those to break. And you start working it loose. Again, pull back, and then we can find all of our bulbs that are in place. Just want to give those a quick counterclockwise turn, and we should be able to pull those out. Once we have all 3 bulbs removed, we'll set our taillight aside and remove the other side as well. So at this point, I went ahead and turned on my taillights. Now you'll notice that that's going to be the only circuit on right now, and that's the way we want it. We want to isolate our taillight signal, so No foot on the brake, no turn signals on, just your taillights. And we need to test the wires that are connected to the bulb that's lit up. That way we know which one of them is providing us the power when our lights are on. So we want to remove the tape here. Just want to be careful not to damage the wire. We'll pull the electrical tape off so we can expose the wires underneath and start our testing. So underneath we have a red, a black, and a blue wire. I'm going to take my tester, hook it up to a good ground, and then we're going to check each one of these wires and see which one is giving us our power. So now if I take my tester, you can see we are getting a signal on the red wire. So on the driver's side over here, the red wire is going to be our taillight signal. Now I'm going to go ahead and turn my taillights off. I'm going to have an assistant press on the brakes, and we're going to repeat that testing process. So now that we have our taillights turned off, you can see that same bulb is actually lighting up brighter. So I'm going to go through, we'll start testing our wires. And this time we're getting a signal on the blue wire. So over here on the driver's side, our red wire is going to be our taillight signal, and the blue wire is going to be our brake and turn signal. Now we're going to repeat that testing and verify the wires over on the passenger side as well. So now that we have our wires identified, we need to bring up our yellow wire and our brown wire to our taillight housing over here on the driver's side. So to help us out, I'm going to be using a pull wire. This is a piece of airline tube that I had laying around. You can use whatever you have available, even if it is just a coat hanger. But I'm going to go in between the body and the bumper here, and I'm going to feed my airline tube down until it'll come out the very bottom of the bumper, and we can get access to it. Now you may need to reach up and be able to grab our pull wire. Now again, you want to grab just the yellow wire and the brown wire. We can leave the white wire and the green wire underneath for now. We want to find the end of our yellow and brown wire, and we'll attach it to our airline tube and pull it up top. Now whenever you pull your wire up, you want to make sure you pull all the slack through. And then what I like to do is take a zip tie, and I'll actually zip tie it to this factory wiring here. That way, in case anything were to happen, we don't have to worry about the wire falling back down. It'll hold it right here so we won't have all that slack underneath. So I went ahead and pulled back more of the insulation so we have plenty of wire to work with. But we're going to start out with our blue wire, which if you remember is going to be our turn signal and our brake light. We're going to come downstream from the plug just a little bit. We're going to cut that wire directly in half. We want to strip back both ends of the wire. And we'll grab a diode that has all blue connectors on it out of our kit. So we want to grab two of the terminals off. Doesn't matter which ones we grab. Just grab two. Slide our connector over our wire. And we'll crimp it down, make sure it's nice and secure. Do the same thing on the other side of our wire. Then we can take our diode, we'll remove the last terminal off of there, and if you look, we're going to have an inside and an outside. The out terminal is only going to have a single one, and that's going to go closest to the socket itself. So we'll take that end, plug it into the out terminal, then on the other end, we'll plug it into one of the in terminals. Doesn't matter which one at this point. Just want to plug it in, so we have our blue wire going to the in, goes through our diode, and then goes out to the socket. Then we'll take our yellow wire. We're going to estimate about how much wire we need to reach our diode. I always like to give myself a little bit of slack so we can get our taillight out. And we'll cut our wire and strip back the end of it just like we did with the other ones. And then we'll crimp on our last blue connector. And then that's going to go into the other in terminal on our diode. So the way it should look is we should have a blue wire going through our diode and then the yellow wire going to the inside as well. So we're going to do the same thing with our red wire. If you remember, that's going to be our taillight wire. Except this time we want to grab the diode that also has a yellow connector on it. For now, we'll grab the two blue ones, crimp it on our red wire. We'll remove the yellow terminal. Again, just plug the one furthest into the in terminal, the one closest to the socket into the out terminal. We're going to estimate about how much wire we need again for our brown wire. We'll cut that right at that point, except this time we want to hold on to the excess wire, and we're going to strip back the end coming up as well as the slack that we just cut off. We're going to take the two ends, we'll combine them together. And that's what that yellow spade terminal is for. This is just going to be a bigger terminal, so it's easier to fit two wires inside of there than trying to cram them onto the blue one. Let's put both ends in there, crimp it down, and plug it into our taillight diode, just like that. So now that we have the driver's side hooked up, we can get ready to move over to the passenger side. So we're going to take our brown wire, we're going to pass it back down through the bumper, we're going to meet up with our green wire, route it underneath, move over to the passenger side, and again hook it up the same way. Our green wire is going to be our turn signal and our brake lights, and our brown wire is going to be our taillight signal. Now you might wonder if you have enough wire. It's probably not going to be enough to reach over to the other side because of how we routed it. However, they do provide you with a butt connector in your kit, so you just pick up some more 16 gauge wire and we can run it over to the side. And if you do need to pick up some, you can find some here at etrailer.com using part number 16-1-1, and that's going to be 16 gauge wire by the foot. So we got our diodes hooked up over here on the passenger side, and you'll notice that they're going to be the exact same colored wires from the factory. So our red wire is still going to be for our taillight circuit, and our blue wire is still going to be for our brake circuit. What I like to do is to clean everything up a little bit. Our diodes are going to have this little sticky tape on the back. I'll remove the backing off of each one of my diodes. And just so I know I have enough room, I like to stick these together rather than against the body of the car, because our lights are going to have to go back into our taillight housing, so we want to make sure that we have enough slack and we don't stick them to the car, because then it'll make it very difficult to get the taillights out. So we'll put them together on the other side, then we can start putting our taillights back in place. It's a little bit of a tight fit with the diodes back there, so you may have to move things around as you get everything back in place. And once we have it in place, we're going to replace the fasteners and tighten them down. So, if you remember, we still have our white wire underneath the back of our CRV. Now this is going to be our ground wire, so we need to find a nice flat spot that we can attach it to. And actually, if we look up, our frame rail's right here, so we can attach it directly to the frame rail. So I'm going to estimate about how much wire I need. I'll cut off the excess. Then we want to strip back the end of it. We're going to grab the ring terminal out of our kit. Be a small one with a blue end on it. We'll slide it over, clip it onto the end of our wire. Now you can either use a factory ground that's already there, or you can use the included self-tapping screw, and that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to let go of my ground wire for now. I'll grab the included self-tapping screw. I'm going to take the self-tapping screw and a 5/16 nut driver. I'm going to go directly into the bottom of the frame here. Now that I have it started, go ahead and pull the screw out, slide the end of our wire over it, and we'll reattach the screw into the frame. Now when you're tightening these down, you want to tighten them enough to where that ring terminal doesn't move, but you also don't want to strip that screw out. And now would also be a good time to tie up any of these loose wires underneath here, throw some zip ties on there, make sure they're nice and secure, and then we can put our panel back in place back here. At this point, we're ready to wire out the plug that's going to be on the front of our CRV. However, we have some more components that we're going to be installing, and if you do too, I suggest now would be a good time before you put that fascia back on, have plenty of room to route anything and install what you need to. But once we have our fascia back on, we'll show you how we're going to wire up our plug. Now that we have our fascia reinstalled, we can mount up our plug. Now on our base plate, we have a spot right here we mount our plug nicely to. It's going to have these two prongs that are come out in the center. We'll just use some hardware to attach that socket to it. But what I'm going to do to start out is I'm going to take the dust cover off the back of my plug, and I'm going to take all my wires. This is a separate wire for our braking system, so you may not have that, but it's going to be wired into our 6-way as well. Just want to get all the wires towards the front. I'm just going to push that dust cover kind of back out of the way for now. Now I'm going to cut the end of this connector off, and we want to split all 4 wires, but we only need a couple inches of each one. We don't have to go that far back on it. You just take a pair of cutters, go right in between the wires, being careful not to damage it. Once you have a little bit, you should be able to pull the wire and separate it. Once we have them all separated, we want to strip back the end of each one of our wires. So now if we look at the back of our plug, each one of these terminals is going to be labeled. So we'll start at the very top, 12 o'clock position. That's going to be labeled TM. This will be trailer marker. It's going to be our brown wire. We'll go counterclockwise. The next one is going to be GD for ground. That'll be our white wire. The next one will be LT for left turn. That'll be yellow wire. RT for right turn. That's going to be your green wire. And if you have a 12-volt power source in your motorhome and you're running a charge line kit, you put it in the center because that's going to be your 12-volt power source, and it is labeled A for auxiliary. And then finally, the last one is going to be labeled S, and we're going to use that for our monitor light, but that's going to be your electric brake control signal. Now the way this is going to work is we're just going to loosen up the screws. I personally don't like taking them all the way out because they're really small and they're really easy to lose, so just loosen them up enough so you can get the wire inside. We'll find the corresponding wire. In this case, it's 12 o'clock position, so it'll be the brown wire. Put it into the terminal. And I always like to leave just a tiny bit of copper right at the top, so I don't have to worry about the insulation causing any kind of connection issues inside the terminal. You don't want to leave enough to where it could actually cross over and start causing any arcing, but just a tip so you don't have any kind of connection issues inside the terminal. I'm just going to go through and continue to hook up the rest of our wires on the back here. So this is what it should look like once you have everything hooked up, minus the black wire if you don't have that in yours. But these 4 wires should be in that sequence and all tightened down so they're not going to come out of the terminal. We can go ahead and take our dust cover now, slide it back over the back end of the plug. What I like to do is I like to wrap the entire back end and a little bit of the wire as well with some electrical tape. It'll not only help keep the boot in place, but it'll keep anything from coming inside the back and causing corrosion inside those terminals. And this is going to be optional, but again, I think it helps protect the wires, helps protect the terminals inside, but also it's going to hide the colors on the wires a little bit better just because black's going to blend in rather than the bright yellow and green on the front of our CRV. I'll just go back as far as I can reach with the tape. I'm going to take a self-tapping screw and a 5/16 socket, and I'm going to use the screw to secure it to those 2 posts on the front. The final step of our installation is going to be testing our circuits. So I went ahead and hooked up my tester. Now you can use your motorhome, make sure everything's working properly. But I'm going to go ahead and turn on my taillight signal. You can see those are working, as well as the left turn signal, my brakes, and my right turn signal. All we have left to do now is hook up to our motorhome and hit the road. But with all that being said, I'm Rob here at etrailer.com, and that'll finish up your look at the Roadmaster high-power diode wiring kit on our 2013 Honda CR-V.